Hey folks, this is Doing Draft Skis, and Innistrad Midnight Hunt is about to drop on Arena in a week or so. And so we have a limited guide here to help you get ready for first drafts and sealed decks for limited. And we're going to go through the colors, the archetypes, and the synergies in the set. Starting off, we have the mechanics. These are the new ones. Daybound, Nightbound is technically a new mechanic. The old Innistrad sets had werewolves which transformed, but it was a little bit different. This time, Daybound, Nightbound creatures, or Planeswalkers in this case, only trigger when it's your turn. You're the only one who can affect the day-night cycle, and you do that the same way. So if it's Daybound, or if it's day and you cast no spells during your turn, it becomes night. And then if it's night and you cast 2 spells during your turn, it becomes day the next turn. So that's the only way to manipulate it. The other player, your opponent, cannot impact the day or night cycle. They can only do it during their turn. So slight change, but relevant in this case. Up next is Coven. This is primarily in white and green, but this is a mechanic where if you have 3 or more creatures with different powers, so 1 power, 2 power, 3 power, you get an effect. This is we'll have to see how it plays out and how easy it is to have 3 creatures on the battlefield in limited, where you're constantly, trading creatures off. There's removal, all that type of stuff. So we'll have to see how this one plays out to see if it's viable in limited. But excited to try it out. Up next is Disturb. I really like this mechanic. This is just pure value. So what this one is, if you have a creature with the Disturb ability on it and it dies, so Malevolent Hermit here, you trade it off or whatever. It sits in your graveyard, and if you pay the Disturb cost, it comes back to the battlefield transformed. Now, these will come back as spirits, and if they go back to the graveyard when they're a spirit, they get exiled instead, and so you can't just do it over and over again. But still a very strong 2-for-1 mechanic, and you could bounce your spirit, because it only exiles itself if it goes to the graveyard. So really like this mechanic, primarily in white and blue, but black also has a few disturbed creatures as well. There's going to be some returning mechanics as well. So Transform was in the second Shadows over Innistrad, which is you could consider werewolves as transforming creatures, but they're daybound, nightbound. The other transform stuff is just going to depend on the condition, right? So you have hostile over here, and if you sack a creature, it builds soul counters, and if you get 3 or more, then it transforms, right? And then you get Creeping In, which is just a sick card that is going to end a lot of games. This card is actually busted. For 4 mana, you can phase it out, and so your opponent can't even deal with this thing. Up next, returning one of the favorite limited mechanics of all time is Flashback. So that's just going to be you cast a spell, and then it goes to your yard, and then if you pay the flashback cost, you can cast it from your graveyard, and then it becomes exiled. So graveyard interaction, exiling cards out of your opponent's graveyard, their disturbed creatures, their flashback creatures, is going to be a definite payoff benefit in this set. Lastly is Investigate. Everyone, this is a fan favorite as well. It's a cheaper way to do draw a card because you create a little token and you have to pay 2 to get your value from it. There's only 5 cards with this in the set, but it's still coming back, and I know it's a fan favorite. So there's also a really neat little common in blue that uses this, so you're going to see these tokens around. All right, next up in the draft, things that we want to be aware of just at a high level. So first off is synergy. Innistrad has always been a very synergistic set. It's tribal. The mechanics are very tightly bound into their lanes. So, and that's no different here, right? You have your werewolves, humans, vampires, zombies, spirits, right? You're going to have all those tribal things. You have a werewolf lord here, Tovalar. And then you also have your, your flashback deck, your self-mill, your coven deck, but they're all very tightly synergized. So you're going to be looking at how good is this card in the deck it's supposed to be in, rather than just the raw power level. And there are, of course, going to be just rawly powerful cards, and we're going to go over that, is those just raw power cards as well. But you're going to want to keep an eye out for what is synergistic. Next up, and this is going to be the same for pretty much any set, but you want to get your value. There's a lot of ETB effects in this set. There's lots of ways to recur things from the yard, whether it's disturb or flashback or graveyard recursion. So there's lots of ways to get value, and you want to take advantage of that. Right? There's lots of good removal, but removal is going to be worse if you can just pick your creature up out of the yard, or if it comes back later, or if the spell flashes back, right? So you want to make sure you can get your value when you can. Lastly, this is going to be the same for every set as well, but interaction. You want to make sure that because this is such a synergistic set, that you're going to want to stop your opponent from getting those enablers to stick on the field so they get more bonuses, more benefits, more synergy. You want to be able to interact with those threats. So there's a lot of very strong removal at the common level in this set. So you just want to make sure that you keep an eye out for that and that you're picking that up as well. All right, let's get into the colors. So first up, we have white. We'll start with uncommons, and then we'll get into the top commons. So let's just go ahead and start with the new O-Ring. Right? It's called Borrowed Time, but it's functionally the exact same as O-Ring. Exile target non-land permanent, and opponent controls until Borrowed Time leaves the battlefield. Now, what makes this really good in this set is that there are those disturb creatures, there's graveyard recursion, way to get value out of your graveyard, and this just exiles it. It just gets rid of it. So your opponent can't mess around with it once you dump it in the graveyard. So very valuable there, just answers a threat. Next up is value. We talked about value, but white has this recursion theme. It also has kind of a sacrifice theme with black. So Gavany Downguard here is a 3/3 for 3 ward 1, which is just a fine rate anyway. But it has one of those day-night cycle abilities, so if it's neither day nor night, it becomes day when this ETBs, and then when day becomes night or night becomes day, you look at the top 4 cards of your library, and then you can grab a creature card with mana value 3 or less and put it into your hand. So that's just value over and over and over again. With Gavany Downguard, and your opponent's just going to have to deal with this. So this is just a rawly powerful card that's going to go and tutor up your other creatures. Lastly is a little mini balance. It's a super cheap 2-mana sorcery, but it's good for catching up, right? Which is when you really want a spell to be at its best, is when you're behind. If you're ahead, probably not going to need as much anyway because you're winning that game. But Sunset Revelry, 2 mana. If an opponent has more life than you, gain 4. If they have more creatures than you, create 2 1/1 human creature tokens. And if they have more cards in hand than you, draw a card. So if you can kick off all 3 of those conditions, or just the creature and cards one, that's huge. Especially because white cares about go wide. It cares about sacrifice. There's some pump. So battlefield pump in white as well. So there's lots of little mini synergies with this card that can help catch you up, or just help you win a race, right? If you're racing your opponent and you have your flyers and they have werewolves, you can beat them out in the air because you create 2 chump blockers and then you gain 4 life. So this card, I think, is sneaky good, and it's really cheap. So we'll have to see how the format plays out to understand really how this one's going to play. But up next, commons. So first up, Morning Patrol. This is a 2/3 vigilance for 3, which is not great, but it has disturb for 3 and a white. So if it dies, you sacrifice it, whatever, you can pay that disturb cost and get yourself a 2/1 flying vigilance, which is just an efficient little 2-for-1, right? A 2/3 vigilance, your opponent's going to have to trade with it at some point, or it's going to team up and double block something, or whatever it's going to do, but it's essentially a little 2-for-1. So super nice. Next up, Gavany Silversmith, 4 mana for a 2/3. When it ETBs, you can put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures, and it can target itself. So if you have your Morning Apparition in play, and you play your Silversmith, you can make the Silversmith a 3/4, and then you can get yourself a 3/2 flying vigilance. So a great little ETB effect from Gavany Silversmith here. That's going to make your little creatures bigger threats. And then also, if you have a bunch of creatures out, you can just not put anything on the Gavany Silversmith and use it as sacrifice fodder or whatever you're going to do. So I just think it's a very versatile, strong card that's going to pump up your flyers. Lastly, I had a difficult time with this one. Candle Trap. Now, this could be an actual trap. If it's hard to get Coven, or your deck's not built to get Coven, this card is pretty unplayable, right? Unless you have a lot of flyers, maybe. But it's 1 mana, enchant a creature, turns it into a defender, and then that creature can't deal damage, combat damage. But if you have Coven, you can pay 3, sack it, and exile the enchanted creature. So then it becomes very strong. There's a Theros Beyond Death enchantment called Apathy something, where you can just exile the creature that you pacify. And then this would function in a very similar fashion. It becomes very strong then. So we'll just have to see how the format plays out and see how easy or difficult it is to play to get Coven. To determine kind of what this one's going to do, but and how playable it's going to be. But I want to take a chance on it right now because I think it has a very high upside. If you can exile a creature and stop, a disturbed creature or some sort of recursive creature and exile it, that's going to be huge, right? All right, up next we have blue. So first things first is a disturb payoff. This is at an uncommon called Overwhelmed Archivist. So it's a 3/2 for 3 mana. When it ATBs, you loot. You draw a card, discard a card. So that's already just a fine creature on its own. Because there's so much graveyard synergy, flashback spells, disturb creatures, you can discard those and still get your value from that, or you can discard a land, right? If this thing dies, you can pay the disturb cost, you get a 2/1 flyer, and then whenever it attacks, you loot, which is huge. So this is a must-answer threat in blue. The 2/1 is. So this card is incredibly strong, just on a generic level. A 2/1 flying looter is powerful, especially in a set with so much graveyard interaction. Up next, this one we'll have to see. This is understated. 4 mana, 2/3 Firmament Sage. But it becomes day when it ETBs, and then whenever day becomes night or night becomes day, you draw a card. So if you're able to manipulate the day-night cycle, this card becomes very, very strong, and you can get a ton of value off of it. So we'll have to see how easy or difficult it is to manipulate the day-night cycle and how slow the format is, right? To give you time to get your value from this. One thing to note, blue should be a little bit better at manipulating day-night because blue tends to have a lot of instant speed spells. And so if it's your turn and it's day, you want it to go to night, you just don't cast anything during that turn, and then you have a bunch of instant speed spells that you can cast during your opponent's turn, so you don't waste your mana, leave it sitting around. Last up is going to be the build around, so we'll have to see how this one does as well, but Ominous Roost, I'm excited for this one. 3 mana enchantment. When it ETBs, or whenever you cast a spell from your yard, you create a 1/1 blue bird creature token with flying, and this creature can only block creatures with flying. So it's not a very good defensive card, but if you can accrue that value and set up a board state, this thing's going to bust through, right? If you have 6 or 7 disturb and flashback creatures in your deck, and you draw this, you're going to get a ton of value out of this card. So we'll have to see how this one plays out. A 1/1, of course, is not a very impressive stat line, but if you get enough of them, you're gonna mess some stuff up. All right. Next up are the commons in blue. There's a lot of good commons in blue. I think Organ Hoarder is going to be the best. It's one of the most pushed of the commons that I've seen in this set. It's a 4 mana zombie, which is a relevant tribal type, right? Blue-black is the zombie deck, but it's a 3/2 and it ETBs. Look at the top 3 cards of your library, put one of them in your hand, and the rest into the yard. So you get to draw the best of your top 3 cards, and then you can pitch either a land, a flashback spell, a disturb spell, and get even more value. So it could often read just a 3/2 for 4, draw 2, draw 3. So that's just insane value. At common especially, I think this card is first pickable. Up next is Gale Drifter. So 4 mana flyer. It's a 3/2, which is already a fine card, but it's a threat that your opponent has to deal with. They have to. Because 3 power in the air is going to end the game. The disturb cost, 4 and a blue. So when they do deal with it, you go ahead and get a 2/2 flyer back, which is another creature that they just have to deal with at some point. Up last is going to be Revenge of the Drowned. 4 mana for an instant. Target creature's owner puts it on the top or bottom of their library, and then you create a 2/2 black zombie creature token with Decayed. The blue-black zombie deck, we'll get into that one and what that one is when we get to the archetypes, but there's tons of ways to create little 2/2 black zombie creature tokens. And Decayed just means it can't block, and when it attacks, it dies at the end of combat. But you can use them as sacrifice fodder. There's a series of cards that tap them for a benefit. So I think this is really, really strong, right? This is just instant speed removal spell that you get a 2/2 token for. All right. Black is up next. The removal in black is ridiculous. Just throw that out there. The best at the uncommon level, I think, is Infernal Grasp, which is just 2 mana instant destroy a creature. Can't get more efficient than that. The 2 life is inconsequential, but if you use this to nug some massive werewolf or whatever, I mean, that's just crazy, right? 2 mana instant speed removal, just fantastic. Value. So I have this one in the green-black deck. It's a kind of a morbid theme, which is whenever a creature dies, you get a benefit. For morbid opportunities, it's understated again. 3 mana, 1/3. But whenever one or more other creatures die, draw a card. So we know that black and blue create a bunch of little tokens that die, so you can use those to draw cards. Of course, the removal is amazing in black, so you're going to be killing a lot of things that way. So you get a ton of value over time from morbid opportunities. The other one I wanted to talk about, and I'm usually not a huge fan of these cards, is the Assassin in this set. Covert Cutpurse. 3 mana, 2/1. Not great, but destroy a creature you don't control that was dealt damage this turn. So if you swing in with one of your stupid decay zombie tokens, your opponent eats it, because why wouldn't they? They don't want to take the 2 damage, and they have a 4/4. You play this, you kill their 4/4. This thing, there's a ton of sacrifice synergy in black and white, and in black in particular. Sack this, trade this off, get this into the yard, cast it for its disturb cost. You get a 2/2 flying death touch, which can go on and kill another werewolf or something, right? It's usually going to trade up, good on defense. It's a flyer, so you can't get around it. So I think there's a lot of value in this card. It's just a straight up 2-for-1. You do have to do a little bit of work to get your value from it, but creatures trade off all the time in limited. So I think the Assassin is going to be a good one here. All right. Top commons. These are all going to be removal spells, but they're just that good. There's a lot of really good creatures at the common level, 2 in black. But I just can't pick those over these removal spells right now. We'll have to see how the format shakes out. But Eaten Alive up first. Single black mana. You can sack a creature or pay an additional 4, but you exile a creature or planeswalker. So exiling is huge in this set, as we've discussed, because there's so much graveyard interaction and disturb creatures. So this is massive. And then you also have all these this sacrifice fodder in black. You have your 2/2 zombie tokens. So you're going to be able to pay 1 mana for this effect most of the time. And I mean, if you have dies triggers, like if you're in the green-black deck, you're going to get value from that. So it's just an amazing card right here. I think this is super strong. Up next, Olivia's Midnight Ambush. 2 mana instant speed. Target creature gets -2/-2 until end of turn. And if it's night, you just delete the damn thing. You just delete whatever. -13, -13 until end of turn. Deleted. Okay, so Olivia's Midnight Ambush is hyper efficient. And it's easy to get something to day or night, right? If it's your turn and it's day, you just don't cast any spells. And during your opponent's upkeep, it becomes night. And then you just cast this and delete whatever their huge bomb is or whatever. Lastly, I have Defenestrate. And this is the one we'll kind of have to see, right? Destroy target creature without flying. Instant speed. 3 mana, so hyper efficient. But it doesn't hit flyers. In limited, flying is just a really good keyword, and a lot of the big threats that you want to kill are going to be flyers. In this set in particular, there's a lot of werewolves, which are big, fat, green and red ground creatures. So I think Defenestrate is going to have a place there. But we'll have to see. A lot of really strong removal in this set. Like I said, 3 of them in black as the top commons. Up next, we have red. So one card I really wanted to call out is a Game Thief. You're going to lose to this game. I'm going to lose to this game, and I'm going to get salty. Lunar Frenzy. This is one of the best tricks I've seen in a long time. It's red and X. Target creature you control gets plus X plus 0 and first strike and trample until end of turn. So your opponent swings with a 4/4. They have 5 mana up. They can make that thing an 8/4 trample first strike and just wipe your whole board or kill you. The other thing you're going to watch out for is if your opponent just has 1 mountain up and you swing into them, they can give any creature they want first strike and trample, which is relevant. So this card I think is super strong and it's going to steal some games. I don't know if it's first pickable yet. I certainly wouldn't want more than 1 or 2 in a deck because it's, you don't want that many tricks, but I think it's a very strong trick. Next up, I have a big dragon. Just generically powerful dragon. 4 power flyer for 5 mana is always going to be good. And whenever it attacks, it can ping creatures that defending player controls, or it can take out an X2 zombie. Those zombie tokens it can destroy as well. So I think this card is going to be good. There seems to be some X1s in the set, especially in those Coven decks. There's some smaller flyers that are X1s as well. So last up, we have removal. Like I said, a lot of good removal in this set. Cathartic Pyre is a 2 mana instant, deals 3 to a creature planeswalker. There also is a modal ability, which you're not going to use very often, but if you need it, you need it, and then it's great. You discard 2, draw 2. And so sometimes it can filter your hand for you. If you're in a blue-red deck that has a ton of flashback spells, maybe it makes sense. Maybe you're at the point in the game where this isn't going to help. You can always pitch it. So I think it's a very versatile card, but you're usually going to use the 3 mana instant speed kill a creature side of this. So very strong, first pickable as well. All right, up next the commons. First off, I've heard this called Nightling Bolt, but Moonrager slash 3 mana instant speed, deals 3 to any target, and if it's night, it's only a single red mana. So hyper efficient removal, fantastic, first pickable, very strong card. Nothing else to say about that one. Up next, I have Ardent Elementalist, and I'm just kind of a sucker for these, to be honest. It's a 4 mana 2/1. When it ETBs, you're going to return an instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand. The blue-red deck is the instant and sorcery deck, and there's a lot of powerful cards in this set. So I think there's a lot of value in this. It's understated, of course, but you usually see that in most of these types of effects on these creatures. So, best case scenario, you can trade this off or use it to jump or double block something down the line and get your value that way. But when it ETBs, what you want is to get that instant or sorcery back from your yard. Last up is Famished Foragers. Having 3 toughness can be a liability in most limited sets because you have stuff like Moonrager slash, right? But it's 4 mana for a 4/3. When it ETBs, if an opponent lost life this turn, you get 3 red. So that's huge because you can play this and then like another 3-drop from your hand, or you can use its repeatable ability, which is 3 mana, discard a card, draw a card. So it has value late game, a lot of value late game, and filtering your hand for you as well. So I really like this one. I think it's pushed quite a bit. It technically is supposed to belong in the black-red vampires deck, but I think this has applications just in any red deck. It's just very strong. All right, next up is green. So green is kind of a weird color. There's lots of value mana sinks in this, and that's because it really wants it to be nighttime. So it wants, so there's a lot of creatures that allow you to dump mana into them so you're not casting spells, but still not wasting your turn. There's also some flash spells in green and then instant speed stuff as well. But one of the best value sinks, mana sinks, is Hound Tamer, which is a 3/3 trample for 3, which is already fantastic. And then, but it just has a repeatable ability, 4 mana, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. And then if it turns into night, you get a 4/4 trampler, which makes all your other wolves and werewolves trample. And then you still can just get recurring value, +1/+1 counters on your creature. So this thing will just take over a game. This card is insane. One of the top uncommons in the set, I think. Next up, Interaction Clear Shot. This is a reprint, but it was in the last set, Shadows over Innistrad. Just a great bite spell, 3 mana, instant speed, bite a creature, and then buff yours. So you can use this as a combat trick as well and set up 2-for-1s, but it's just very strong. Lastly, every green every set is always going to have a big dope. And this is no different. And this one might be one of the most pushed ones I've ever seen. 5 mana for a 6/5 Ward 1, which is already insane. It's already huge for the cost. And then if it's nighttime, it becomes an 8/7 Ward 3, which is just ridiculous. That's completely insane. For 5 mana? Yeah, sign me up. It's just a big old dope. You can give this thing trample or get this thing once. I mean, it's hard for your opponent to deal with because it has Ward 3. So it's just a massive threat. So I really like this card. I just think it's funny. It's just so huge. All right, top commons. Eccentric Farmer is first up. I like this guy. We'll have to see how the format plays out, but green-blue is the self-mill, and then flashback archetype, but I think Eccentric Farmer is just good. It's a 3 mana 2/3. Green also has a lot of different ways to bring stuff back out of the yard. 3 mana 2/3, so it's a little understated for green, but it's fine. When it ETBs, you mill 3, and then you return a land card from your graveyard to your hand. So you have a lot of big fatties in green, so you're gonna want your lands. So it's gonna 2/3 for 3. That's gonna draw you a land. There's also Evolving Wilds in this set, which is great because if you crack your Evolving Wilds, you can cast this, and even if you don't mill a land, you can get your Evolving Wilds back. Which is still value. So I think this one's good. There's a fight spell in green that I didn't include here, but it's a Coven fight spell. So that might be in here. We'll have to see how the set plays out. There's a lot of really good instant speed removal, though. So I don't know if it deserves to be in top commons. Up next, Shadow Beast Sighting. 4 mana. Create a 4/4 green beast creature token, which is a fine rate. What pushes this one over the top is the flashback. Right? 7 mana, you get another 4/4. It's just value on value. 4/4 green beast creature token. That's a real card, and your opponent's gonna have to deal with it. It's a threat. Your opponent's gonna have to spend removal on it, and then you're just gonna be able to flash this thing back. So it's just a 2-for-1. If you can get to 7 mana. So I think this card is just super valuable. It's also, of course, has synergy in Self-Mill in the flashback deck. So just very strong. Last up is the big dope at common, and that's Tireless Hauler. So 5 mana for a 4/5 Vigilance is already fine. Vigilance is a very underrated keyword. Vigilance is strong because you don't have to worry about leaving stuff back. You can't really race a Vigilance creature the same way you can't race a lifelink creature. If it's bigger than your stuff, there's nothing you can do. You just got to take 4 to the face. And if it's nighttime, you got to take 6 to the face. 6/6 Vigilance for 5 mana is huge. So green really does want you to have things be nighttime. All right. I think this is last up before we get into the archetypes. So Colorless, glue card. So this is either going to be useless or it's going to be the golden egg. If you remember Eldraine, it's going to be the golden egg of the set. I think if this card is good, this format's going to be sweet. But it's 1 mana. You can sack it, exile a card from a graveyard. We've talked about flashback and recursion and the disturb creature, so there's value in exiling a card from a graveyard, and then you draw a card. So 2 mana, it's going to cycle itself. And then when it's in your yard, you can pay a mana and filter, right? You can enable a splash. If you're stuck on 1 green and you need 2, you can use this to get your 2nd green, so it can help smooth out your draws. So I think this card has potential to be a little glue card because it cycles itself, right? You can just kind of toss this into your deck. But we'll have to see how aggressive and splashy the format is. Up next, Colorless Removal. Silverbolt is just a fine card, right? It's 1 mana, so you can use this to double spell if you want to go from night back to day. And then 3 and tap it, sack it, deals 3 damage to a creature, so it kills it. But if it's a big-ass werewolf, you just kill it. So it's super strong, and it's at common. So it's just going to be eating werewolves out there, and this thing's going to piss me off if I'm playing werewolves. Bet your ass. All right. Lastly is fixing. We talked about Evolving Wilds being in the set, but this is, I think, the best colorless fixing in the set. There's a couple other artifacts that'll do that. There's a mana rock at rare, and then there's a filter artifact at uncommon. But I think Evolving Wilds is just where you want to be. So take this highly if you're going to be splashing, or if you need to smooth out your mana, if you got tough mana in your deck. All right, let's get into the the archetypes. So white blue is up first. They're going to do self-mill, but not like green blue. Green blue is going to be self-mill with flashback. This has self-mill, but it's more to enable the disturb cards, right? So first up, we have Devoted Graphkeeper. It's 2 mana for a 2/1, which isn't great, but it's going to trade off when the ETBs you mill to. Whenever you cast a spell from your yard, you tap a creature you don't control. Kind of a minor effect, but again, everything in this color pair is going to drive towards that synergy. So you're going to get a lot of value from this. And the big payoff, 3 mana, and you get yourself a 3/1 flyer, which is a threat. Your opponent's going to have to deal with it. So your opponent's either going to have to be stuck taking your value, repeated value from your Devoted Graphkeeper, or they're going to have to deal with a 3/1 flyer. So I think that's a great card. Up next, another one that's going to help mill and get your disturbed creatures in the yard is Faithful Mending, which is a play on Faithless Looting, which was in one of the prior Innistrad sets. But you gain 2, draw 2, discard 2. This is also going to have flashbacks, so you're going to get tons of value from this. If you have other flashback spells, if you have other disturbed creatures, you're drawing 4, you're discarding cards that are going to get you value from the yard, and you're gaining 2 life. And it's at instant speed, and it's super cheap. So just a very strong card. I think this card's really cool. Last up, I wanted to talk about Phantom Carriage. 6 mana. I might even have this on another archetype because I think this card's so cool. It's a 4/4 flyer for 6, which is a great rate. This is a game-ending threat, and you can tutor up your best flashback or disturb card and put it into your yard. So that's just awesome. I mean, there's disturb and flashback cards at rare. So you can just find your bomb with this, and you get a 4/4 flyer on top of it. So just a fantastic signpost, I think, for the deck. And this one goes great in the flashback or the disturb deck, and so this kind of fits in both. There's lots of cross-pollination, synergy clusters, I like to say, and we'll talk about that later too. All right, some of the synergy pieces that you're going to want to look for. Cards like Celestis Sanctifier. It's a 3 mana 3/2. Whenever it becomes night or day, you can look at the top 2 cards of your library and put one of them into your yard. So it's going to help you self-mill. It's going to help you mill the cards that you want, get rid of excess lands, and it's all going to come for 3 mana on a 3/2 body, which is just fine. Next up, Shipwreck Sifters, 2 mana 1/2. I'm still on the fence about this, but if you're in the deck, it could be really useful. When it ETBs, you loot, so you get value there. And then whenever you discard a spirit card or a card with disturb, you get a +1/+1 counter. So when it ETBs, if you discard a spirit or a card with disturb, it ETBs as a 2/3. It comes into play with that counter on it. And then if you're able to do it once more, it becomes a 3/4, and then you're just at a fantastic rate for a 2-drop. Last up, I have Covetous Castaway. Love this card, super strong. It's a 2 mana 1/3. When it dies, mill 3. So you got to figure out a way to get this thing in the yard, right? Whether it's chump blocking, some sort of sacrifice thing. You'll have to figure that out. Or if you just mill it, right? If you mill it with Shipwreck Sifters or Celestis Sanctifier or the draw 2, discard 2 spell, there's lots of ways to do that, right? Because you can get Ghostly Castigator back for 5 mana is the disturb cost. 3/4 flyer, which is a great threat. It's got a big butt too. 4 toughness is usually the magic number in most limited formats. So, but when it ETBs, you shuffle up to 3 target cards from your yard into your library. So if you're milling yourself a lot, you're eventually going to mill cards that you don't want to be milled, and this is going to put them back in your library, so you get more value. So I think this card's really strong. All right, up next, Orzhov Signposts. So this is going to be sacrifice payoffs, graveyard interaction. Starting with Flesh Taker, my vote for the creepiest damn artwork in this whole set. 2 mana for a 2/2, fine rate. Whenever you sack a creature, you gain a life and scry 1. So we're already doing pretty well. But it can sacrifice on its own for just a single mana and gets +2/+2. So this thing is like entirely unblockable, especially if you got a lot of those 2/2 decay creatures running around. Because then you can just sack a bunch and make this thing an 8/8 and just kill your opponent in 1 turn. Also, like if your opponent tries to exile your creatures, you can sack in response and get value from it. So this card presents a problem. Up next, Rite of Oblivion. I think this card is amazing. 2 mana, it is sorcery speed, but you sacrifice a non-land permanent, like let's say your zombie token, and then you exile a non-land permanent. So that's huge. It also has flashback for 4 mana, so it's just a 2-for-1, right? This color combination, this guild, is going to want to sacrifice stuff anyway. So just fantastic. Next up, I have Bereaved Survivor. So this is that graveyard interaction part of the color combo. So it's a 2-1 for 3, which is understated. All right, but whenever a creature dies, you transform it. It becomes a 3-2 that whenever it attacks, you get to return a creature card with mana value 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, tapped and attacking. So unlimited value with this thing. It's just a 2-for-1, right? If they kill your Flesh Taker, you can get it back. If your Flesh Taker's sacking stuff or you sack something to Rite of Oblivion, you can go ahead and get it back. So I think that's just going to be a fantastic card if you can get this in just once. You just need to be able to get it in once. The 2 toughness is kind of worrisome because when it attacks, your opponent's going to block. It's going to trade for something, but you should get your value there anyway. All right, synergy pieces. So I think Vengeful Strangler is particularly powerful with the last one. So it's 2 mana, key, right? 2-1, can't block. When it dies, you return it back to the battlefield transformed under your control, attached to target creature or planeswalker an opponent controls. And that enchantment is at the beginning of that enchanted player's upkeep. They have to sacrifice a non-land permanent and lose a life, which means they're going to sacrifice whatever you attach it to. Now, if you can recur this guy, which is just a 2 mana card creature, there's lots of ways to recur it, and then sacrifice it over and over again, you're just going to kill all of your opponent's creatures. So I think that's super strong. We'll see how fiddly that is, and if you can pull that off in an actual match, but I think it's super strong. Up next, Audric's Outrider. So this and Unruly Mob are going to be just direct payoffs in white for creatures dying. So whenever Audric's Outrider or another creature you control die, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. So it doesn't have to be on Audric's Outrider itself. You can just spread these things around and build up a board of threats. Lastly, I have Morkrut Behemoth. This is another enabler, which enables you to sacrifice things. 5 mana for a 7/6 menace is insane. It's absolutely insane and massive. If you don't have anything to sacrifice, though, you can also pay 7 mana for it. So in the late game, it's still fine, too. All right, next up, Boros. So this guild is not very well taken care of, in my opinion, but we'll have to see how this shakes out. So there is some loose synergy around going from day to night, night to day, and then there's some spell damage stuff and some beatdown elements to this. It's a little aggro. So you start off with Sunrise Cavalier, 3 mana for a 3/3 trample haste, which is fantastic, right? 3 damage out of nowhere. And then if it's not day or night and you cast this, it becomes day, and you can get a +1/+1 counter when it becomes day, when day becomes night or night becomes day. So if it, I guess if you would have to cast a second spell. Yeah, this card is still strong. You can still get +1/+1 counters, but we'll just have to see how often you can flip day to night and night to day to determine how valuable this is. Up next, Sacred Fire. This card is super strong. This is super sweet. 2 mana, deal 2 damage to any target, and you gain 2 life. And then it has flashback, so it's just a straight up 2-for-1. So just a simple, easy 2-for-1. Lastly, Flame Channeler. This one goes more in the blue red as well deck, but this has specifically when a spell you control deals damage. And so that seems to be more in the red-white sphere, where blue-red just cares about instants and sorceries themselves. But this goes in both decks, so this is, again, that cross-pollination of synergies, that synergy cluster, right? So it's a 2/2 for 2, and then when a spell you control deals damage, transform it, you get a 3/3, and then if you're able to do it again with direct damage, you can get flame counters on this thing and then use that to essentially draw cards. So that's super strong. So every time you hit your opponent with a Sacred Fire when this is transformed, you can use that to exile the top card of your library and then play it for a single mana. So super strong. All right, synergy pieces. I chose Brimstone Vandal. One of the signposts that we showed there, it cares about when day becomes night or night becomes day. And then Brimstone Vandal starts pinging your opponent each time it happens. So it's a 2/3 menace for 3. So not a great rate, but I don't think this guild is very good. But we'll have to see. Up next, Play with Fire. This is again something that deals damage as a spell to enable like Flame Channeler and stuff like that. It just deals 2 damage. Very efficient removal. Any red deck's going to want to Play with Fire. And then lastly, Burn the Accursed is another one. 5 mana, instant speed, deal 5 to a creature and 2 to that creature's controller. And then if that creature would die this turn, exile instead, which is relevant in this set. Exiling creatures is super relevant. And then this is also instant speed. So one thing to know. All right, up next, white-green. This is the Coven deck, and there's also a loose tokens theme as well. So Signpost, 3 mana for a 3/3 Vigilance with Dawnheart Wardens at the beginning of combat on your turn. If you have Coven, all creatures you control get +1/+0 until end of turn. So all of your little tokens, your 1/1s, all of them get pumped by this card. So this can enable some pretty nasty attacks, I think. And to note, Coven doesn't trigger when this attacks. It's just all of your creatures get this as long as this thing is on the battlefield. It doesn't have to attack as well. So it just provides that value every turn for you as long as you have Coven. Up next, I have Ambitious Farmhand. I really like this spell. This creature, it's a 1/1 for 2. When it ETBs, you can go grab a Plains, put it into your hand, and shuffle. So you're already getting value there. You're already getting your land in your hand, helps smooth out your draw, right? And then Coven for 3 mana. You can transform it, and you get a 3/3 lifelinker, which is a straight-up threat, right? You can't race a 3-power lifelink creature, so your opponent's going to have to deal with that. So it's just a ton of value if you can get Coven on this card. I really like it a lot. Lastly, we have Join the Dance, and that's going to get you your tokens theme, right? So it starts just at a very good rate, 2 mana to make 2 little 1/1 white human creature tokens, and then you can flash it back to get 2 more, and that gives you 4 1/1s. Off 1 spell. So just a very efficient token creation spell so you can pump up all your creatures. All right. Up next, Contortionist Troop. I actually like this one a lot. So this is green X, and it comes ETBs with X +1/+1 counters on it. So in the last slide, we had 3 power stuff and then 1 power stuff. If you make this a 2/2, all of a sudden now you have Coven. And then at the beginning of your end step, so the turn after you cast this, or the turn that you cast this, if you have Coven there, you're going to be able to start putting +1/+1 counters on all your creatures. So you get a ton of value from this thing. So I think that's awesome. So really like Contortionist Troop. Up next, Ritual of Hope. We talked about those battlefield pump spells. This is going to be the Coven one. 2 mana for an instant speed. +2/+1 to all your creatures. Even if you don't have Coven, you still get +1/+1. But if you have Coven, this card's pretty nutty. All right, this will end quite a few games if you have those tokens out as well. Last, we have Dawnheart Mentor. I think this one's going to end quite a few games as well. 3 mana, you get an 0/4 and a 1/1, which is fine. It's not great, but that provides you 2 power levels for your Coven. So you're 2/3 of the way there, right? You have a 0 and a 1. And then when you do have Coven, you can pay 6, give any creature you control +3/+3 and trample. So then what are you going to do if you're the opponent and every creature that you have now gets +3/+3 and trample? It's just going to end the game. And it's got a big butt too, so it's hard to deal with if you're a red deck, right? Because of the 4 toughness. So I think that one's pretty nice too. All right, next up, Zombie Tribal. This is the Dimir deck. There's Decay tokens, which we talked about. Really excited to see how this one plays out. First up, we have Blade Stitched Scab. Pretty simple, but a very good rate. It's still a Zombie Lord. 2 mana, 2/3, gives all your other zombies +1/+0. And those Decay tokens you create are zombies, and they now become 3/2s, which are a big deal. They're going to trade off for a lot of creatures. Next up, Corpse Cobble. 2 mana, instant speed, which is really nice. As an additional cost to cast this, sacrifice any number of creatures, create an XX blue and black zombie creature token with menace. where X is the total power of the sacrificed creatures, and then it also has flashback, so you're going to get value from this as well at instant speed. So if you can use this, of course, like if your opponent targets one of your cards with removal, right, you can sacrifice in response. But this deck creates so many of those 2/2 decay zombie tokens that you're going to be able to sacrifice a bunch of those and just get a massive threat on the board, which is awesome. Next up, I just have anything that really creates decay tokens to go in this slot. Is just going to work really, really well in this deck. So Falcon Abomination, 3 mana for a 2/2 flyer. It's a Windrake, right? That's fine. When it ETBs, you make a 2/2 black zombie token creature token with Decayed. Decayed means it can't block, and when it attacks, sacrifice it at the end of the combat. So you're just going to be able to create a ton of these incidentally, get a huge squad of zombie tokens, and there are some synergy pieces to interact with those that we're going to get into right here. All right, first up, Scob Wrangler. So you're going to see this in blue and black cards. It's 2/1 for 2 mana, tap 3 untapped creatures you control. It includes itself. So if you have 2 decay creatures as well, you can tap them. So you tap 3 and then you tap target creature. So if you get a ton of tokens, you get 6 of these tokens, you can start tapping down their whole damn board, right? And then start swinging in when you tap down their threats. So I think that's super strong if you can do the thing, right? But it's one of the things we talked about is in Innistrad, it's very laned out. So you really, the only decks that is going to want this is one that can create a ton of those tokens, those decay tokens. Up next, Larder Zombies, another one. We'll have to see how this one plays out. I don't know. It's a 1 mana, 1/3 defender, so it's a huge derp, but it enables self-mill stuff. You can filter your library, get rid of excess lands. So there's lots of little things that you can do here. Find, if you see a disturbed creature at the top of your library, you can always put it in the yard. So there's lots of little applications for that. And last up, Siege Zombie. This is a good way to win a game of Magic. So 2 mana, 2/2, tap 3 untapped creatures you control. Each opponent loses 1 life. So if you can get to 6 of those decay tokens, you can start pinging your opponent for 2 each turn. And then once they get to a certain point, you can just Alpha Strike for the win with your zombie horde. Because if they're dead, you don't care if all your decay tokens die after combat because your opponent's dead. So I think this deck is going to be awesome. I hope it comes together. All right, next up, another one of the fan favorites is going to be the Spells Matter deck. And that's instants and sorceries for Izzet here in blue-red. Starting with some of the signpost gold cards, Storm Skrillex, 2/4 flyer for 5. Instant and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. And whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, Storm Skrillex gets +2/+0 until end of turn. This reminds me a lot of Maelstrom Muse, I think it was, in Strixhaven. But this card is super cool. And it's just a fairly straightforward beater, a threat that your opponent has to answer. And then if you're able to cast multiple instants and sorceries in the same turn, this thing's just going to kill them, right? Next up, Arcane Infusion. 2 mana instant speed. So one thing to note, look at the top 4 of your library. You can reveal an instant or sorcery from among them, put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. And it has flashback. So it's going to dig you towards your other instants and sorceries. It's cheap. It's instant speed. So it's just going to play really well in the deck. Next, Spellrune Painter. I think this card's super cool. I always like these types of effects. But 2/3 for 3. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn. So your opponent can't block this in case you have a bunch of instants in your hands, right? So it becomes very hard to block. And if you flip it, it becomes a 3/4 that gets +2/+2 every time you cast an instant or sorcery spell. And that is another way to end a game of Magic real quick. So I really like that one a lot. I think that's cool. There's lots of instants in this deck as well. So it's really easy to get things to turn to night. Because you can still use your mana during your opponent's turn. So I think that's awesome. All right, next up, Thermo Alchemist. This is a classic from Shadows over Innistrad, but it's a 2 mana 0/3 defender. Tap it, ping your opponent. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you can untap it. So you can just start machine gunning your opponent to death with this card. Delver of Secrets. I wouldn't recommend playing this, but I had to include it because it's another classic card from original Innistrad. 1 mana for a 1/1, not good. But at the beginning of your upkeep, do the top card of your library. If it's an instant or sorcery, you can transform it into a 3/2 flyer. So this is only going to be good really in your opening hand, and then you can start looking at the top card of your library, hoping to spike your 3/2 flyer. And if you can, it's great. It's awesome. You can win a game, but it's difficult to do unless you have, I would say, I wouldn't include it in my deck unless I had between 12 and 14 instants and sorceries. All right, up next, Seize the Storm. This card is sick. So 5 mana, create an elemental creature token with trample, and its power and toughness are each equal to the number of instant and sorcery cards in your yard, plus the number of cards with flashback you have in exile. And this has flashback itself. So you get 2 game-ending threats for the price of 1. So this card is nuts. And it's also going to end a lot of games. I can't wait to play with it. So I think Seize the Storm is insanely strong. All right, up next. This is going to be a great deck too. I hope it is. But this, the Simic blue-green deck is flashback, self-mill. Starting with Root Coil Creeper, one of the coolest signposting commons in the set. 2 mana, 2/2. It adds 1 mana of any color to your mana pool, so it enables splashing, which is really fun. And then you can also tap to add 2 mana of any one color and use that on your flashback spells. Actually, you can also use it on disturbed creatures as well. Good to know. So it fits in both. That's awesome. Tap 2 and exile it. Return target card from flashback you own from exile to your hand. So it also gets you value there. So awesome signposted common. You have to deal with it. You have to take out this card as soon as you see it hit the battlefield because it ramps your opponent, fixes their mana, it gets their flashback cards back. It's just way too good. We talked about Ominous Roost before, so I'm not going to get into it, but this is the deck that's going to want it the most, right? Because you're casting spells from your yard all the time. And then Winterthorn Blessing. I'm not sure how I feel about this one, but it is a cheap flashback card, so you're going to get value there. 2 mana, put a 1/1 counter on a creature you control, and then tap 1 creature you don't control, and then you get the Frost Links effect on it. So it's good on offense. Plus, you can use the flashback. So I think you get some value there. For 5 total mana, split across 2 installments, I think this card is going to end some games too. So it's you know, it's a fine card. All right, up next, Dryad's Revival. So I think in this deck, this card is going to be useful, but it is kind of clunky. But 3 mana, return a card from your yard to your hand, and it has flashback itself. So it's going to give you recursive value for your Ominous Roost or whatever you're doing there. Otherworldly Gaze. I think this is the only deck that's going to want to use this card. So you can pick this one up really late. But 1 mana, lose the top 3 of your cards of your library, put any number of them into your yard, and the rest back on top in any order, and has flashback for 2. So you're going to be able to dump all your flashback spells, any land you don't need, any of your disturbed creatures into the yard with this for very cheap cost. And it's instant speed. So, lastly, Turn the Earth. This goes with that self-mill strategy here. 1 mana for an instant. Choose up to 3 target cards in graveyards. The owners shuffle them back in, and then you gain 2. And it also has flashback of 2. So you're going to be able to, if you mill, you go turbo mill, you mill too many cards back into the yard, and you're going to deck yourself. You can use Turn the Earth. You can also use this to nug your opponent's flashback stuff and their disturbed creatures as well. So I think this deck is probably going to want a copy of this if they can get it. All right, next up, Rakdos Vampire Aggro. This is going to be the aggro deck. It works with a mechanic functionally the same as Spectacle. This deck is very strong, and I hope it doesn't dominate the format because we've been dealing with Forgotten Realms red-black this past couple months, and I'm sick of Rakdos. But this deck does look really strong. Vampire Socialite, 2 mana, 2/2 Menace, which is already a great card. When it ETBs, if an opponent lost life this turn, you get a +1/+1 counter on each other vampire you control. And then it does that all over and over and over again, as long as an opponent loses life. Each vampire you control enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter. So it's a vampire lord that buffs all your vampires, and then any vampire that you cast comes in more strong. So very, very good. Kalane style signpost uncommon. Up next, Hungry for More. 2 mana. This is just to help you get in, right? Your opponent's not going to want to block this because it's going to trade for something. So it's going to enable those life loss synergies, right? 2 mana for a 3/1 vampire token with trample, lifelink, and haste, and then you sack it. So you can also pair this with some sacrifice synergies in black as well if you have the mana for it, which is strong. It also has flashback of 3. So you're going to get 2 3/1s that are lifelink. So that's a huge life swing that's going to turn on all the other synergies for stuff like this. Voldaren Ambusher. This card I think is really strong if you have enough vampires to support it. Right? It's 3 mana for a 2/2, and if your opponent loses life, it deals X damage to one creature or planeswalker, where X is the number of vampires you control. So really, to turn this thing on and make it really good, all you need is one other vampire in play when you can use this ability. Dealing 2 to a creature is enough to kill something on the field, in which case you get your value. So card's super strong if you can enable it. Up next, Stromkirk Blood Thief. I'm not sure how to think about this one yet, but it's 3 mana for a 2/2 at the beginning of your end step, and if an opponent lost life this turn, you get a 1/1 counter on target vampire you control. So it only targets vampires, but it can target itself, and it happens at the end step. So that means if you do damage your opponent, you can play this after you damage your opponent and then still get the counter at the start of your end step. So I think there's some application there. Also, this can help snowball vampires, right? So you get your 2/2 vampire in, you get a 1/1 counter on it, and then your opponent, now they can't block that creature because it's now a 3/3. Stuff like that. Next, Falcon Wrath Perforator. 2 mana for 2/1. When it attacks, deals 1 damage to the depending player. So it just automatically turns on all your life loss synergies. Whether or not it survives the combat, it just deals your opponent some damage. Then we also have Voldaren Stinger. I think this is a sneaky good 1-drop. It's a 1/1 for 1, but it has first strike when it attacks, and as soon as you have 3 mana, you have threat of activation, right? It gets +2/+0 until end of turn, and it's first strike. So 3/1 first strike will kill stuff, and so your opponent can't block this because you can just activate and eat their creature. And then if they don't block it, it turns on all of your life loss synergies. So I think this card is really good, very integral to the Vampires deck. There's also, they reprinted Vampire Interloper, which is a 2 mana, 2/1 flyer that can't block, but you're not really looking to block with the Vampires deck anyway. So I think this deck could be really strong. So something to watch out for. All right, next up is Golgari. So this is going to be the Morbid deck, triggers on death. There's also some recursion here as well. So 5 mana to zombify, but it costs 1 less for each creature that died this turn. So if you have decay tokens or sacrifice synergies, which exist here in this deck, it's going to get cheaper. And it also has flashback for 7. So you're going to get your value there too. So that makes this card super strong. Up next, Grizzly Ghoul is the other gold signpost. 4 mana, 4/3 trample, which is a fine card. It's all right. 3 toughness is kind of weak, but for each creature that died this turn, it enters with a +1/+1 counter. So if you're able to trade off a creature with your opponent that turn, it enters as a 6/5 trample for 4 mana, which is pretty sweet. Next up, I really like this card. It's a 1 mana 1/1. At the beginning of your upkeep, if there are 3 or more creature cards in your graveyard, you transform it, and it becomes a 3/3. Death Bonnet Hulk. And then you can exile a card from your graveyard. If a creature, at the beginning of your upkeep, you may exile a card from a graveyard. So you can exile your opponent's disturb creatures or their flashback spells. If a creature card is exiled this way, it gets a +1/+1 counter. So this is all for a 1 mana spell, right? So hugely efficient. Once it transforms, it becomes a real problem that your opponent has to deal with. All for 1 mana. Fantastic card. I think it goes in any green deck, but I think it's especially strong in the Golgari deck. All right, up next, Dreadhound, just a big fatty. 6/6 for 6. When it ETBs, you mill 3, but like we saw, there's tons of ways to get stuff out of the yard, including one of the signpost uncommons that we talked about. And then whenever a creature dies or a creature card is put into a graveyard from a library, each opponent loses 1 life. So that includes if this mills a creature, just deals your opponent a damage right there. Up next, Morbid Opportunist. We talked about this one as well, but ways to get recurring value from your, from any creatures dying. You just draw a card, draw into more gas, kill more creatures, run away with the game. Ghoulish Procession is another way to really get a ton of creatures in the yard. 2 mana for an enchantment. Whenever 1 or more non-token creatures die, create a zombie creature token with Decayed. This ability triggers only once each turn, but it can trigger during your turn and your opponent's turn. And so if that black zombie creature dies, it'll trigger your other, your Morbid Opportunist or whatever. So super strong. Very good in this deck, but I think it's also very good in the blue-black deck as well. All right, I think this is the last guild. So this is what the set is named after, right? The Midnight Hunt. So this is the Werewolf Tribal deck. It's about turning things to night and then beating the shit out of your opponent. There's also a lot of mana sinks in this deck to help you use your mana while it's your turn, or while it's your turn, spend your mana so you can turn it into night and you don't lose a turn, right? So Kessig Naturalist, a 2/2 for 2 mana. Whenever it attacks, you add mana to your mana pool. Fine, it's whatever. But the other side is what you're looking for. The other side is the Werewolf Lord, right? Pumps all your wolves and werewolves, which are already fat enough, right? And then whenever it attacks you again, get that extra mana. So awesome. Werewolf Lord for 2 mana. Can't beat it. Next up, Village Watch. We talked about the one that gave all of your wolves trample. This one is a 4/3 for 5, which is under rate haste, which isn't a good rate. But on the other side is all your wolves and werewolves haste. So that means if you can keep it at night, you can start just smashing your opponent's face with a bunch of 6-power haste creatures, which is crazy. So at night, this turns into a 5/4, gives all your wolves and werewolves haste. Last up is the other gold signpost uncommon, and it's the only card in this set that I think just makes it become night. And it's 2 mana, turns it into night. Till end of turn, target creature gets +1/+0, trample, and then when it deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. And it has flashback, so you're able to instantly turn it to night before combat, which is key, because you can just massively pump up all your creatures, give one of them trample, and since they're already gigantic, they're gonna deal damage, and then you draw a card, and then you can flash this back and do it again. If your opponent manages to turn it from night back into day, you can just turn it back into night again during your turn. You don't have to wait till the end of your turn, so that's fantastic. All right, the mana sink and flash synergies are what I want to talk about here. So Howl of the Hunt, 3 mana, flash. When it ETBs, if it enchants a wolf or werewolf, you untap it. So you can ambush your opponent, and then it gets +2/+2 and vigilance. It turns it into a huge threat. You ambush your opponent at instant speed. So I think this card is a very fine trick. It sets up a lot of 2-for-1s and also creates a massive threat your opponent has to deal with. Wouldn't want too many of them though. Maybe just a 1-of. This type of deck. A Lambhole Terrier, 2 mana, 2/2, 4 mana, target creature can't block this turn. So one of those mana sinks that we were talking about, right? You can dump your mana into this on your turn, make it so your opponent's Death Toucher can't block or whatever, so you can get in with a wolf, and then since you didn't cast any spells that turn, it becomes night the next turn. Last up, I have the Basking Rootwaller reprint, 1 mana for a 1/1. Not great, but tap 2, give it +2/+2 until end of turn. It becomes a 3/3. And that's going to be a problem, right? A 3/3 is a real card. It's going to trade for something. So it's a good mana sink to have, a good 1 or 2 of in any green-red deck. And I think it might just be a good card in green. We'll have to see, though. All right. There's synergy clusters. This is the last bit before we take off here that we're going to want to look at. So flashback and spells are clustered around green, blue, blue, red, And well, green-red is more of the um, werewolf deck. But if you look at blue-green and blue-red, you get a lot of flashback, a lot of spells matter, self-mill, those types of cards. And so blue is kind of the center of that. So in the draft, if you're starting off with blue cards that care about spells or flashback, you can kind of look towards those other two colors, green or red, if you're in blue, to try to figure out which lane you want to go down. Next up is the day-night cycle, right? So when night becomes day or when day becomes night. And that's primarily in the colors of blue, red, and white, right? We talked about Firmament Sage in blue. There was that Gavany Dawnguard, I think it was, in white, which care about things becoming day or things becoming night, turning the clock on that cycle. So there's some synergy within those colors as well that you want to keep an eye out for. Werewolves in night. Black does get werewolves. They have one at common and uncommon. And all three of those colors tend to want things to be nighttime, not daytime, right? They buff up their werewolves, of course, but there's also Olivia's Midnight Ambush in black, which wants things to be at night. There's Moon Ragers, whatever, which becomes a lightning bolt at night. So all three of these colors have some werewolf synergy, and they want things to be at night. Next up, there's a sacrifice tokens theme in Abzan colors, so black, green, and white. Tons of on-death triggers in green, black. Tons of ways to make tokens in green, white. And then there's tons of ways to sacrifice things in white, black. So all three of those colors kind of dovetail together. So you can get some synergies there as well if you're looking to splash. Last up, I have mill and recur. And there's 4 colors in this one, which kind of threw off my little graph here. But all 4 of these colors really want you to self-mill, get stuff back out of the graveyard. There's disturb creatures, there's flashback spells, there's ways to mill yourself, there's ways to bring stuff out of the graveyard, there's ways to manipulate your opponent's graveyard. So all 4 of these colors really care about those as well. So you want to keep an eye out for that in the draft as well. But yeah, I think that's going to be it for me. This is my first crack at this set, so hopefully in a week we can start playing with the cards and see how things shake out. All right, thank you.